In this episode, we're going to talk about the tech of Trek and ways that you can use it in your game. This is STA Engage. Welcome to the show. I'm your host, as always, Dr. RPG Jeff Harvey. In the last episode, we talked about creating strange new worlds, new life, and new civilizations for your group to seek out and explore. If you missed that episode, go back and check it out. In this episode, we're going to talk about the fantastic tech of the Star Trek universe, and ways you can enhance your game using that tech and keep your game from being all about Technobabble. Speaking of babbling, before I get too much farther into my babbling rant here, let me introduce my co-host, the imbroglioed, it's only really imbroglio, Michael Dismuke.
Great. Now I'm wasting time Googling this word while we're running the show. Thanks a lot.
You're welcome. I had to find that one on there. So the goal of this show is to help fans of Star Trek and of role-playing better engage with the Star Trek franchise and the Star Trek Adventures role-playing game, as well as the community for that game as large. This show is brought to you by the letter F, the number 178, which is the number of TNG episodes there were, and the support of people like you. So like, subscribe, share, and support us on Patreon. There's all kinds of cool stuff over there that I'm getting up to make it worth a little more worth time. Keep this show going for the rest of season 1 and help us create season 2. If you find more information, or you can find more information on the folks who sponsor this show and help with the show on the show together. I'm getting all kinds of messages and it's bumming me out. Check us out. It's all the doobly-doo. Let's get into the stuff for this episode, though, since I'm all flustered now. But in order to get
You're
into
acting
this topic,
like you've been talking about Technobabble or something.
Right. My tech is babbling at me and it's confusing me, and I don't like it. So before we get too deep into this topic, though, let's get an expert on STA and Trek tech. Let's welcome our special guest, writer, and more than a little bit of a tech savvy individual. Anyways, Aaron Palea, welcome to the show. I have messed up this intro so bad. I'm sorry.
Even his name. I think you need to reroute.
Palea. Sorry. You know what?
That's okay. That's okay.
I even checked it with you before we started.
Yeah.
Yeah. I'm just
that's
flustered
okay.
now.
Most people are unable to pronounce it.
Yeah.
Without multiple tries, so that's okay.
Let's try it. Let's try it one time. Aaron. Paulier. There we go.
All good.
I'm going to fix this for you. Just give me a second. I'm just detecting a quantum breakdown in the graviton ray compactor, and now go. There you go. You're good for the rest of the show.
Okay, right. we were bleeding in from an alternate reality where my family's name was more badly mauled.
Right. All right. First, let's get some context on what you actually do in regards to STA, Aaron. Let's tell everybody what it is that you do.
Well, I've done a lot of different things for STA. Generally, what I started doing was a lot of the technology and science portions of the core book, and let's be honest, the starships. I'm kind of like the starship guy, and that's bled over into all the books that have been published. If there's starships there, generally I've been the one to write all the information about them, stat them out. Sometimes changes have to be made, with what I've given, hey, that Krenim time ship is a little too powerful. Let's tone it down, Aaron. Okay, not a problem. But I also.
So what I'm hearing is that people can curse you when other ships blow away their characters and players' ship. They can all scream, "Polly!"
Oh yeah, well, I hope that I haven't destroyed too many starships out there. And then I also write some of the adventures. I've written a couple standalone adventures that have been published, as well as a few adventures in the campaign for the Shackleton Expanse.
Gotcha. That's stuff for the living campaign, or do you have stuff coming up in the new book as well?
Living campaign, there's going to be some stuff. Well, I have stuff in the new Shackleton Expanse book that will be coming out. I can't really talk about it until it comes out, but I'd be happy to do once that happens.
Right. Yeah, there's gonna be a lot of exciting stuff coming out when that book comes out. What got you interested in working with STA and really working on Trek tech in general?
I've been a Trek fan my entire life. I've said to other people before that one of my earliest memories is sitting in the back seat of my parents' car at a drive-through theater watching the motion picture on the big screen. Like I was like 2 years old and a few months, but I remember the wormhole scene and being really cold and thinking that it was really pretty, where they had the imbalance in their warp drive.
Right.
And my parents were kind of Trek fans, so I grew up with it in the house. I felt it was a great world to live in because everyone worked together. Um, and I found the technology fascinating because you could go to different planets and stars and meet new people and see beautiful things. So it really always stuck with me. And so while it wasn't the first game system that I wrote for, I kept doing a lot of stuff for myself on the side, playing around with ideas for Star Trek. I want to make my own tactical game. I want to do this and that and this and that. And then I heard about Star Trek Adventures being put together, and I submitted, I don't know, 50 pages worth of material saying, look, I can do this. I have a lot of this stuff in my head. And do I have a place with you guys? I'd love to work with you.
Nice.
And they said, sure, absolutely.
So,
I'll start putting together some stuff that will fit into what we're developing, and go ahead.
So glad you did. I know that my crew has really enjoyed playing your modules, especially for those of us who are sciencey and really like to go off the deep end of science, but grounded in reality. You're very well researched, I've learned. Your ideas are based off something somewhere in the universe, and that makes it really fun. So for any of you out there who really like diving into true science fiction, check up Aaron's modules. Are really good.
I try. My background, I did astrophysics as an undergrad, and then did for my graduate work, I went into climate change studies. So I have a lot of passion for space, kind of behind me. And I love putting real science into things. I like being able to say, hey, look, Vulcan is a K-class star. It's orange, so Vulcans would see in a lower spectrum than humans. Therefore, they might not perceive the color purple like we do, but they might be able to see into the infrared a little more. So,
which is why that Oprah Winfrey movie flopped on Vulcan.
No, and they're not fans of Prince either, because you can't just get into Purple Rain when you don't understand it.
I have to plug in at this point that I have the privilege of you playing on my game as a chief science officer, and it definitely keeps everyone thinking and sometimes pause, like, let's check that out,
I apologize when I get a little too technical, I guess, or when I start breaking down a problem, like, are quasi electrons like virtual particles? Is that what we're dealing with here?
That was a real question, by the way, in our last game.
Nice.
Yeah, that was a real question, and you're like, no, it's not. Okay, I wanted to make sure because I had a really cool idea, but it would revolve around having virtual particles.
My reply was just no.
The idea of having the grounded science, I think, is extremely important for the Star Trek series, and it makes it a great way to do gaming. Star Trek doesn't really use real science, but they use a very close approximation of science in a lot of ways. Let's get down to talking about the tech of Trek, and that stuff's going to come up as we go along. Star Trek is definitely high-tech sci-fi. It's not hard sci-fi like some people have thought about it being. And I know a lot of players and even GMs can get really intimidated by the established science of the show. There's a lot of feeling that Star Trek is too smart and too real with the science. And it can be overwhelming for some people who don't speak nerdnese. So what do you guys say to new players or new GMs who want to get into Star Trek but are nervous about their nerd cred? My wife, for example, does not understand science. She is not a science people. So she really was hesitant to get into this game. What do you guys do to get people more interested in the tech of Trek and understand it better?
I would say that you don't need to be the uber science geek to start off with Trek. You don't need it. If somebody says there's a graviton pulse and you don't understand what a graviton pulse is, big deal. In the narrative of the story, it should tell you what the graviton pulse does. Or if you're a GM, you should explain what a graviton pulse does. Because in the end, a character can not know that either and look it up. it's not like every character is, even in Starfleet, is going to be well versed in particle physics. So don't worry if you don't know something.
As a GM, one of the things I do because of that is I've noticed when I watch all the Star Trek episodes that they actually do something very nice for all the viewers.
Mhm.
They use these words, they use this technobabble, but then they create an illustration or comparison. So for instance, like that graviton pulse is moving at the speed of a river. We're like a leaf on a river and we can't get out of there. And then saying something like that all of a sudden let the players think, oh, how would a leaf get out of a river? What are technobabble ways to get us out of this thing? So I do look for a lot of comparisons and descriptions that we do know in nature in order to make sense of the technobabble.
Yeah, and Star Trek does a good job as well of when there is something that is somewhat grounded in reality, that you can fall back on them using the proper terminology in general, not all the time. And that bugs me when they don't use the proper terminology or say something that doesn't make sense. But like if you're going to a red dwarf star, well, a red giant star that's going to go supernova, like in one of my adventures, in general, you can say this star is huge, it's unstable. In general, you're going to know how far in advance that this star is going to explode by thousands and thousands of years. So there shouldn't be a problem, but there is. We don't understand. It's not acting correct. It's not acting like it should be. So why? Why is that? I don't need to go into like the explanation up front. The characters can explore the weird things that are deviating from what would be considered normal on their own time with the GM and
I
come to
want
their
to
own conclusions.
Yeah, I also want to talk about the role of the player and being a good player in a situation like this. You could have some people, again, I'm going to say that Aaron is literally the most technical person I've ever played, but he's also a good, who's ever played my game, but he's also a good player in that, as opposed to saying that's not possible. It's always yes and. Okay, that's possible under these circumstances. So I actually encourage players to be yes and. It's obviously happening. We don't understand it. Doesn't mean it's impossible, even though it's improbable, but yes and this must be why. And that attitude keeps the game pushing forward. So GMs may want to have a little coaching session with their team, their players, and be like, we're yes and here. So it's happening. Don't argue about it. Let's figure out why is it happening in this circumstance.
Right. So there's a famous line in a well-known Trek spoof song that's bounce a graviton particle beam off a main deflector dish. That's the way we do things, lad. We're making as we wish. This mentality really gets very pervasive in pop culture's perceptions of Star Trek. How do you guys keep things from devolving into technobabble solutions? I mean, we talk about having the science mentality and whatnot, and letting it kind of flow through, but how do you keep the tech in check?
I think it's pretty easy, actually. Like as well as I can babble nonsense, at least my nonsense, I hope my nonsense is generally founded in real science. And if I start deviating too much from it, it's not going to sound right. And unless I have a script in front of me saying, here's my technobabble, you as a player or as even a writer, you're generally not going to have like a whole paragraph filled with technobabble that's going to be hard to follow or understand. In general, you as a player or a writer, you might have a specific term that's involved, but within the context of the statement, you can kind of figure out why it's there. If suddenly the grav plating breaks down on deck 8, you're not gonna, if you have a piece of technobabble that mentions like the graviton accelerator, you generally should say, well, it's a graviton accelerator. Gravitons have something to do with gravity, and an accelerator, well, acceleration also has to do with gravity. And if it deals with the grav plates not working, I guess that makes sense to fix it. But if you're not going to have this like 6-sentence long piece of technobabble really as a player or as a GM, because you're not going to be comfortable saying that either. You're going to be constantly looking down at a paper going, oh my God, how am I going to get this all out in a breath? So to me, that's not realistic.
Right.
Yeah, and don't overcommit people to feel that they have to memorize something that was said before. Also, there's many components to these complex machines. So we've seen it in Star Trek plenty of time where they have the same problem, but they fixed it with 2 different ways, 2 different tools. And it's like, okay, obviously this is a complex machinery, which they don't have, the whole show's not about. So, just have fun with it. I mean, no one's very few people are making a novel out of their RPG games, so they'll never be able to hold you to it.
Right.
And just again, it's all about attitude, I think.
So the Star Trek RPG covers a whole lot of time, right? So anything from Duotronic enhancers on the original OG Enterprise to starships getting sick when their chefs cook. So I have two questions really. One is, what is your favorite bit of Star Trek tech? And on that too is, how much of a role do you think tech really plays in your game? This is largely more for Michael. I know you run a game, but Aaron, when you're playing a game, how much does the tech really apply to the way you feel about the game, or is it just a skin that you use to add flavor?
So my favorite piece of tech in Star Trek is arguably the warp drive. It's the simplest, kind of all-pervasive piece of technology in the universe. It gets you from A to B. It works under specific rules in general. And you can understand what it does. If you go to warp, you're going faster than light, and you're going somewhere. You have an engine that's providing the power, and our engine is broke. We don't go. We need to fix things. All right. The Pac-Leds had it right. You don't have the warp drive. Your story's going nowhere, and you're stuck in one place. So from a narrative point of view, and from me just as a person, if I had one piece of tech from Star Trek, it'd be the warp drive. I'd want that, because then you have the universe at your fingertips. But how much is it a part of the narrative, at least to me? Now, Michael might have a different opinion. To me, it's important in the background, like in the back of my head. If I'm playing my ship's counselor character, technology doesn't much matter to him unless he's in his science officer role. And then obviously the sensors are a thing, but how it all works isn't important either, as long as it does. And I think I made a comment a few days ago that my character loves the computer because it just works. It's this incredibly complex piece of equipment that can do trillions upon trillions of calculations every second. It works faster than light. It can randomly produce intelligent beings, and yet it doesn't break down 99% of the time. That's magic. That there are
sounds like you like the computer more than the warp drive.
Yeah, well, my character does. Now, to me, I love the warp drive, but the warp drive also feeds into what makes computers so cool in Star Trek too, because computers can operate faster than light because of symmetrical subspace fields. But that's right.
Yeah, going back to what Aaron was saying about how I view it, I'm going to take one piece from Gene Roddenberry's Writer's Bible, and then the next piece from Stan Lee, my second favorite author of all time. So Gene Roddenberry called the ship a character. Mm-hmm. So to me, and what's nice about the way the game is designed, it actually treats it as a character in the way it has the attributes and disciplines, right? So with that, that's the role it plays in my game. It's a character with certain superpowers, and people need to know that it won't act alone. You actually have to tell it what to do. So that's literally how I treat technology in my game. It is not the game. It just happens to be a character in this case. Then I go over to Stan Lee, who made a point when he wrote, is that the superpowers were the icing on the cake. It was the characters and the personality that drive the show. And we all know that Star Trek would be just as good on TV as it would at a stage play at a local playhouse. You could run a Star Trek show on a stage play, and if you do it right and you got the story and plot points, it's going to be engaging. So honestly, and Aaron knows it from the game, we're very personality-driven game, and everything else is just decoration. Technology is just decoration, because we've played games where there's no technology. They've been separated from it. Mm-hmm. It's still invigorating, and that's, to me, why I like RPG.
That's good. What's your favorite piece of tech?
Oh, replicators for sure.
Yeah.
It would have to be replicators at this point.
Yeah. I mean, I like the idea of warp drive. I would like to go other places to get away from some of the places that I've been. But if I had one thing I could have, it would be replicators. So,
well, sure, replicators are great. Absolutely, I have no doubt.
Well, they can make, the thing is, they can make warp drives. Warp drives can't make replicators.
It's true. How do you guys generate your Technobabble for your game, or just in general when you're playing as a character? How do you create Technobabble, and how, as a GM, do you create your Technobabble?
Mike, you can go first.
I only wrote an article about it on continuing missions. Anybody who wants to become an expert at Technobabble and arm your players with some fun geekery, go to continuing missions, search Technobabble, and there's an article I wrote where I actually put links to 6 different generators, actually 7 if you include the picture that I have on the article. But I honestly use these 6 generators. Plus, if you play on Discord and you download the Majel bot, which one of my players designed and is now spreading around the Discord STA universe, you can just type in !Babble and it will generate Babble until you find something you like. So again, it's super easy. I'm not argumentative about it. Everyone who watches Star Trek pretty much has the ear for, no, that doesn't apply in this situation. And these guys and girls who play the game, they just make it really fun by using these quick tools, and we just keep the game moving forward.
And we'll throw a link for that in the show notes as well, so everybody can get that. So you don't forget, because I think it's important to have Babel generators. Aaron?
I just make it up. I mean, if I see the situation, I can say, okay, it's dealing with this specific subsystem. Here are some different things that have been said in the past, or here's a real science type jive into it, and I can go with the flow. We were dealing with an adventure dealing with a plasma corridor, so of course I was dealing with plasma turbulence or eddies, or electron eddies, and you don't have to be a super scientist to do that. You can just kind of say, well, that sounds like a river, and I can have rapids, or I can have turbulence. Oh, turbulence. Okay, that sounds kind of technical. Plasma turbulence. That's Technobabble. And it makes a lot of sense to almost anyone that would hear it.
Yeah.
Well, and if you think about, honestly, if you think about it too, we all speak Technobabble every day. When you're using your iPhone or modern computer technology, all the terms you're using are from somewhere else, whether it's downstream, data stream, upload, download. Those are trucking terms that all got adopted. So it's totally not unusual thinking that 400 years in the future, they'll be using terms that were generated now in order to describe future.
Right. Coming from a medical background myself, I learned that everything is prefixes and suffixes with a root that goes around it. And that's how I do my Technobabble. So I do it on my own. I kind of make it up as I go. And it's, try to keep it, as you said before, try to keep it relevant to the topic at hand. So graviton particle beams for gravity related things, or chronotons for time related things. And then I try to add, what sounds like a good prefix and a good suffix. And it really puts everything together well, I think. So, do you guys use any outside resources for your tech? Like, I personally have the old TNG and DS9 tech manuals. I have a bunch of old RPG supplements going back to FASA and Last Unicorn Games, Decipher, and of course, I have everything currently for STA. I also use the ACTD website, which I don't remember what it stands for, but I like their stuff. I use a lot of Star Trek Theurgy and other play-by-post games. The now ancient Starship Creator by Simon and Schuster was one of the ones I cut my teeth on originally. The Haynes, the Hayes manuals for Klingon ships. I love that because I also work on cars a lot. I don't have that one, but I want it. Other than watching the shows, what codifies the tech of Trek for you in your game and when you're writing adventures?
Besides the shows, I would say the old Starfleet technical manual, with the Franz Joseph stuff. I loved that as a kid, and I ate that over and over and over. That was like a fine feast to me. But the TNG technical manual, I adore for TNG era type stuff. It really does work well to understand what you're trying to do in that era. If you do have a technical issue, you can go, okay, well, sensors are like this. It doesn't matter if it's referencing the Galaxy class. In general, Starfleet's all going to have stuff that's similar or sounds similar to what's listed in there. The DS9 technical manual is okay. I wouldn't say it's as useful as the TNG one.
No,
that's just my opinion. That might not be popular, but
I completely agree with you. I think the TNG manual is an outstanding resource for writer nerds.
And then it is the Star Charts book. I love that. Just to give you a good idea of where everything is. So if my adventures reference a star or something that I write references a star or whatever, it's because it's in the star charts at X, Y, or Z. It also puts a really good scale on the Federation, so you understand why the Federation is as big as it is, and it's usually not as big as what people tend to think it is. People tend to think that one quote from DS9 that Cisco had of it being 8,000 light years. Well, it's not. It's not 8,000 light years wide. That's for sure. Think of it more like 8,000 cubic light years or something like that. Because a ship that is traveling very, very quickly would take still years to get across 8,000 light years. So, I mean, look at Voyager, right? How long they said it would take to get home, and divide
Everything.
years by, yeah.
Yeah, all the references you mentioned, I use. In addition, I like Seventh Sanctum. Most people are familiar with Seventh Sanctum, which has a bunch of Technobabble generators just for that. Of course, all the books you mentioned about referencing the science of Star Trek. But another thing I really like to do is use Wikipedia or space.com. And I go to those, and what I'll do is maybe they'll have a new science out there, or it could be National Geographic will have a new animal and they're describing what it does. And I start thinking biomimetically. I'm like, how could that be reverse engineered into a story? This actual science of how this animal works or this natural thing works. And now let me blow it up to cosmic and alien scale. Yeah. And I do that because then if people are like, that's impossible, it's like, well, actually, no, the yellow-bellied whippersnapper does it in South America. You know, I like stuff like that. And that's what, Star Trek has been known for doing too, is taking modern science and then blowing it up to that sci-fi level. So Wikipedia is one of my best friends.
We talk a little bit about that in the first Contact episode. You guys want to go back and check that one out. I also agree, like that, all of those things. And I forgot where I was going with that. So what do you guys how do you guys choose to stat your ships? Like what criteria are you using when you're statting out your ships?
Well, some of it is fairly firm, but okay. So when I started doing this, like with the original core book, a lot of it was very vague. Okay, because we knew that we had to have stats. We also wanted to base it. We wanted to have like a baseline. So what do you assume the baseline of a starship would be in Star Trek? And think about all eras.
Yeah, that's a good question. I personally say the most basic ship I can think of is probably the Miranda, most middle of the road ship.
Miranda.
Or Nebula, maybe class. Yeah.
To us, it was well, to me, it was the original TOS Connie. That's like the baseline. Okay, so basically that a lot about that ship. You also know about how powerful it was in different departments and all that. And then how does that progress through the movies? Okay, so how much a refit should give you in a stat bump. All right, no problem. So it refits every 10 years. It gives you a stat bump every 10 years, blah, blah, blah. The Miranda then, well, what's different about the Miranda now in comparison to the Connie? And then you just keep going from there, and you build it out, and then you start going, well, does that still hold fairly true with the NX class and the Galaxy? And then you don't just have the starting point, you have a line now with 3 points that you can start going, oh, okay, I'm going to move it, and now I've statted out the progression of what a cruiser is.
Sure.
Time.
I'm way lazier. I just use all the books that Modiphius produces.
Well, yeah, but I'm talking about
this ship is like that.
But I'm talking about like how we develop the ships at first.
Right. That's great. That's great. I didn't know you did it like that. That's awesome.
Yeah, and then I know that I've talked with people online about scaling with ships. Like how do you do that? Well, it seems like a lot of people think that it's just based on like how big the ship is, and that's not the case. Like a lot of it, and this is where it stops going from this like trend line to more of like a gut type reaction, because some starships are, let's say there's lots of starships in the game that are scale 3, but some are a lot smaller than other scale 3 ships. Well, why? It's kind of a gut reaction of how resilient that ship is. Is a Nova class as resilient as Cheyenne?
Sure.
Or a Hermes class from from TOS. No, it's not, but they're all the same scale. Well, why? And that's where you have to start kind of playing this mind game with yourself, going, well, this
Right.
ship has this role. It has a crew that's kind of dedicated to this. It has these kind of perks that you can kind of think of. Well, okay, I guess it works as a scale 3 or a 4.
You and I talked a little bit about this over Discord, but is there any chance that we might someday see a book that's sort of similar to the Stardock book that was created by the legendary Steve Long near the end of the Fall Last Nuclear Games? I mean, obviously, that book is super duper overkill, but Decipher also created a sort of a system on how they create their ships, how players could build ships in their setting to make them kind of reasonably fall along the lines of what the ships are.
I would say a book like that, absolutely not. Like there just isn't that much detail for building starships in STA. You know, you don't have that level of detail where every weapon, dependent upon its arc, has a different kind of stat,
right?
Or what exactly that warp nacelle does. Now, if you wanted that, you know, if the player base really wanted that, sure, I can do that. That's not really that difficult. But is it meaningful to the game that STA is? Not really. And if you want to have a starship creator, I think people have pretty much been able to reverse engineer how starships are statted out in the game.
Sure.
And I gave more hints on that, like the baseline of the Connie and then fitting it to the NX and Galaxy and blah, blah, blah. But if you want to just build a ship, find a ship that's in the similar era. What is your ship different? Why is it different than that ship? And then change the stats.
Mm-hmm.
Or how I wrote about the Frankenfleet that's after Wolf 359. Like, hey, that actually is kind of like building your own ship class in a lot of ways.
Yeah, that's how I do it. Is I tend to find a ship that's very similar to what I want. So when I built the Lexington class starship, which is from the Klingon Academy role-playing computer game, never been seen anywhere else as far as I'm aware of. But I created that ship for my Lexington game that I'm running, and I just took an Excelsior because it's 30, 40 years later. Here you go. It's a smaller version. It's the smaller ship. It's the Excelsior stats. Here you go.
Okay.
So that's what I did.
Was the Lexington class from that game kind of a carrier? Or am I misremembering?
I don't remember very much. I played it. I run it as a kind of a frontline cruiser, sort of a replacement for the Connies. So
okay.
So it would fit
a little smaller than the Excelsior, so a scale 4 instead of 5.
Correct. Yep.
Yeah.
Yep. That's exactly what I did. Is a scale 4. And it's the players have put a lot of points to it now, so I couldn't tell what the original stats were, but it's I liked that ship. I very much enjoyed that ship.
Insert average guy Mike's facial expression here.
Starship combat can be one of those really rules specific, and let's be honest, it's kind of a bog. It can kind of bog down the game a little bit sometimes. Character level combat is too, but if a GM isn't careful, and if you are careful, you can really keep things moving. Michael, how do you deal with combat in STA? How do you keep it flowing? And Aaron, from a writer's perspective, how do you handle a balance of rich combat rules and story pacing?
So for me, very carefully, I'm going to say, because it's really about checking the rhythm in the room or in the virtual room nowadays. Star Trek has never been about amazing Star Wars space battles, despite what we're seeing in Discovery and Picard right now. We know that. And in fact, it's kind of when my nephews watch it, they're like, really? They didn't even move. They didn't even dodge. They just took the hit from the, it's like they're just sitting there shooting at each other. So yeah, but there's something to that in Star Trek. There's kind of assumed technology, assumed range, assumed spatial movement, because what it's really about is watching the characters' professionalism and watching them bring amazing solutions in a time crunch. Now, we know that STA wrote this huge fleet battle scenario too. That is super difficult to run. We have some tools. We have some tools to make it easier on continuing mission for people. Be very careful with that. I have run an amazing fleet battle. You need a lot of visuals, and we have some articles about some homebrew ideas to make it fun. Some people aren't into that. Ours was amazingly wonderful. However, it exhausted everyone. And I said, this is why you only can do this once or twice per season in our game, because it's just so much to run. And again, it was more focused on the characters than the actual, did that hit really hit? It was just more story based.
Right.
So be careful with it. We have some ideas on continuing mission about how to make it fun.
I will say on the
hit us up on Facebook questions.
I will say on the idea of the big space battles thing, you didn't really see them until late DS9, and I think the episodes you see them in DS9 are some of the weaker episodes in the series. So I agree with you. Aaron, how do you, from a writer's perspective, how do you handle the balance of rich combat rules and story pacing for the GM staff?
So if you look at my adventures overall, I think you would tend to see there being very few opportunities for starship combat. And the reason for that is that in Star Trek, you generally don't see starship combat. Now and then it happens, and when it does happen, it should be meaningful to the story and the characters themselves.
Can I add to that real quick? I want to add why I think this makes sense in Star Trek. Star Wars is so resource heavy. The battles they have, you'd have to drain planets to rebuild these ships. And I have trouble believing there's any alien culture out there that would be so happy to hurl phasers and photon torpedoes at the cost it takes to develop this equipment. So Star Trek to me, it actually seems more realistic, like what would happen. People would be very slow to start warring in space because you're stuck, you're screwed. You're not going to get another ship easily.
Yeah. But I always look to Star Trek II, The Wrath of Khan, as like an example of what starship combat should be. And it's every single hit, every time a phaser hits the Enterprise or Reliant, it means something. There's a character that is moved from one place to another. Scotty's nephew is killed. Kirk has to encounter death in front of him and see one of his good friends mourning immediately because of this guy. He might not escape, and Spock sacrifices himself after the mains go offline when the warp core is wrecked, right? If you have combat, it shouldn't really matter what you're facing. And let me finish the entire statement. It shouldn't really matter what you're facing, as long as the characters are being moved forward in their story or the story is moving forward.
Absolutely.
That being said, when you're writing an adventure, you have to write it with the mindset that there will be players that really want to have a shootout in space. And that this kind of thing does happen in games, because in general, you're not going to want to have a game where you do nothing except cerebrally talk about issues all the time, right? You want to have a little bit of action in your games.
I'm going back to Gene Roddenberry, though. Again, the ship is a character.
Yes.
And Star Trek is not a murder hobo game. So that includes not murder hoboing ships.
Right. I've always looked at it like if Star Trek's characters development is supposed to be wagon train to the stars, then I've always thought that, and I think this has been used before too, that the starship combat is Das Boot. The old submarine movie, and that's actually what I really liked about Star Trek 2 is that submarine warfare mentality. It's hard to do really effectively in a game, but I think when you get it right, it makes for a really compelling enrichment.
Yeah, in an adventure, you generally don't want to have your opponent's starship that you might be squaring off against being that unbalanced, unless it's the Borg. But the Borg are like the special case. I had to write all the Borg ships for Delta Quadrant book. And I was starting to worry halfway through writing it that I'm making the Borg way too scary. And then I stopped and said, wait a second. The Borg should be terrible.
The Borg are the Borg.
Yeah, I shouldn't hold back. I should say, yeah, these things will kill you if you actually get into a fight with it.
Right.
And it's because, here's the big bad. Here's just a regular cube. If you want to get into a fight with that, what's wrong with you? I mean,
exactly.
Right.
No Starfleet character should ever go, yeah, let's go shoot up the Borg and see what happens. Let's see if we can fight them and rip off some implants. It's more of like, we should be terrified of these things, because if we actually do get into a shootout with them, we'll die.
Yeah, somebody on the Star Trek Command Discord server called them a force of nature. I don't remember who said it, but
I completely agree. I think I said that on that Discord was the Borg should be considered a force of nature.
Yep.
You the only way you will defeat nature is by trying to outsmart it. And even then, it only buys you time.
Yep, I agree.
Technology can only take you so far when the Borg themselves, the embodiment of technology, will just make your technology useless.
Yeah.
I'm scared.
All right. We are running out of time. If you guys have anything else you want to talk about real quick, we can get in there. Otherwise, I'll wrap things up here. All right.
Look forward to the Shackleton Expanse book, guys.
Yeah, I'm looking forward to that one.
There's going to be some good Technobabble in it.
And I think, and I want to invite people again, when they have questions about tech and the rules, go onto the Facebook page. We're privileged to be able to have, I represent, of course, the fan community here, and we're privileged to be able to ask these questions and get answers from Aaron and Nathan and Jim and a lot of the other writers, and they respond in less than an hour, much less 24 hours. So if you're preparing for a game, hit up our Facebook page, join Continuing Missions too.
Yep.
Yeah, we're all happy to talk. We're all happy to answer questions, and it's us having a chance to geek out with other people that want to geek out about the same stuff we do. So, yeah.
I absolutely agree. I couldn't say it any better. As one final thought for tech and Trek, Star Trek is a rich world full of wonderful and innovative and increasingly actually common technologies, things that we have now, like cell phones, fax machines, 3D printers, tablets, to the awesome tech that was created, that is being created in a post-scarcity setting, things like replicators and warp technology. Look back at episode 5 and 6 for more ideas and stuff that we talked about with that. But there's a lot of amazing shiny objects that can distract you from what really makes Star Trek so compelling for these last 50 plus years that it's been on the air. And that's, as we've said many times in this episode, the characters and the stories. It's a lot of fun to crosswire the phase coupler and routing power through the ODN conduits as a last ditch effort to re-randomize the neutrino spin of a chronoton buildup shifts, all blah blah, take you back to the Bell riots. I don't know. But tech is not a replacement for story or personal drama ever. It can be used to start the ticking clock, which is a very important aspect in storytelling. It can complicate your story beats or create brick walls, as Michael calls them, and even it can create solutions to complex problems that are beyond the understanding of the players, but not necessarily the understanding of the characters. But it's just set dressing, right? It's flavor that lets us know that we're eating at Cisco's or Quark's and not at the Mos Eisley's Cantina or the Venusville bar from Total Recall. Don't let the tech of Trek get in the way of your story. Use it to sprinkle in the Star Trek flavor, but try not to let yourself ever get too hung up on the babble or the glitz and glamour of the real science behind Star Trek, or the real quote unquote science, as I'm sure Neil deGrasse Tyson would say. You should never, ever, ever, ever be having tech be more important than the characters or the story that your characters get to experience, or the choices the characters get to make. So that's my thought.
There to prop up the characters in the story.
Yeah, absolutely.
Absolutely.
So, and on that note, I think we're going to call it a wrap. If you want to learn more about Aaron, Michael has a great one-on-one interview from several years ago over on Continuing Missions, STA.com. There'll be a link in the show notes for that as well. Next time.
He also does our Science Academy. I have to mention that. Aaron writes a Science Academy series on Continuing Missions.
We'll put a link to that too.
Yeah.
I didn't actually know that. So.
Yeah, there's some articles about the transporter murder box, how you can use it in your game, what impulse drive is, and how other species can travel around at sublight or even warp speeds.
Right. Yeah. So next time on STA Engage, we're going to do a much anticipated topic that we've talked about a lot on the show. We've talked a lot about how to be a better GM and how to use the setting to your advantage. But one thing that we don't talk so much about is, and we will cover on the next one, is how to be a better player for the game in general. So stay tuned next time for the Naked Now or the Montgomery Scott, that should have been the full Montgomery Scott, my bad. Until then, if you like what you hear here and you want to help the show in any way, you can, if you like what we're doing here, just share this with one other person who might like this episode or like any of the episodes we've done so far. Check us out on Facebook, Twitter, Twitch. We're up on continuingmissionsta.com, Reddit. We're everywhere. Check out STA, Star Trek. Check out Continuing Missions, STA.com. It's a hard name to say sometimes. There's a lot of really good stuff over there that you guys can find out. Until next time, I'm your host, Dr. RPG Jeff Harvey. On behalf of myself, my co-host, Michael Dismuke, my inability to speak, our special guest, Aaron Paulier, his cat who was rolling around in the background quite a bit.
Yeah, sorry. That's Copernicus. Yeah.
Copernicus, love it. Isn't that Doc Brown's dog's name? From
the 1950s, yes.
Yeah, there you go.
I just love the fact that you babbled your way through the whole Technobabble episode.
I know it's been an abysmal episode for me.
And,
but
I held my tongue.
It was a clean episode, despite All right. Everyone who works behind the scenes here, I hope you guys have a good and enjoy the show. I'm out. Bye-bye.